Hello, my name is Benji and welcome to Dice vs Cards. Today we go back to the 41st millennium to help you build your first Necron force. Whether you built an army before or this is your first time at this lark, we've got you covered. First things first though, one assumes you're watching this video because you've more or less made your mind up about Necrons, and so we won't be going into any detail about their background and fluff. But let's give you a quick primer nonetheless about what Necrons bring to the table. Well, one word that springs to mind is durability. With reanimation protocols and living metal, both single and multiple wound models are highly resilient. And whilst Necrons always slightly favoured the shooty elements of 40k, a number of new models express delight in getting up close and personal. Whilst their core can be fairly slow and ponderous, there are a number of faster units that you can take, and buffs you can prefer to those slower units. Above all this, with the new command protocols, they are a faction that will reward considerable investment in learning how to play them. But thankfully, they're also fairly forgiving with the aforementioned durability to the new and casual player as well. So with that out the way, let's get to the army, that can be valued in either power, which represents a casual and top level approach to army building and is preferred in narrative or open play, or points, which brings more detail and a granular approach to building your forces. You'll find that this is the preferred choice in matched play. In terms of comparison in 9th edition, it's still the case that 1 power is roughly equal to 20 points. And so we're going to keep an eye on both these metrics during this series of videos. The idea being that you start with enough units to field an army in a combat patrol mission, which we're featuring today and is equivalent to 25 power or 500 points. But in future videos we'll be going all the way up to an onslaught sized force at 150 power or 3000 points. We certainly won't be giving you all your available options every step of the way. You'll need to pick up your own codex for that, but we'll be at least pointing you in the right direction and giving you food for thought right the way through this process. As for today, we'll be prescribing 2 different paths for you to choose from. The first is your traditional all-comers route, a solid all-round ready to tackle anything build that first and foremost gives you a variety in choice, as opposed to spamming the maximum 3 units of all the good and the meta. And then the second is a thematic build, one that is more concerned with overall theme than anything else. The hope being that we can synergize some keywords and receive mechanical gains off the back of this approach. So how do we get from 0 to combat patrol in the most economical and logical fashion? Well, either path you take, your first game with a shiny new army in either narrative or match play will insist on you taking a patrol detachment. And seeing as you can only take 1 detachment in this size game, we're going to stick to the fundamentals and ensure we bring the required 1 HQ, which will be our warlord, and at least 1 troop choice as our rank and file. Now, our Necrons don't have their own start collecting box, but they do represent one of the 2 factions found in GW's core starter products. But Benji, you say, I have no interest whatsoever, even a little bit, in picking up Space Marines. Well, do not fret, Timmy, you're still not paying more than you would separately for the Necron contents, plus you're getting some accessories, like a handy getting started guide and a paper playmat and terrain amongst other things. So do what you want with the blue armoured fellas, gift them to a friend, sacrifice them at the necronic altar, leave them on the sprues. Either way, just hand over the cash for the recruit starter edition and let's get started. The traditional build, which we'll talk about first, is one that looks to the future growth of your army as well. And so the first order of business, or strictly speaking the second, is to pick up the elite starter core set as well. There is some duplication in both the recruit and elite boxes, but thankfully this is of no detriment whatsoever to your plans, as we'll require multiple of these units anyway. You'll certainly be contented in the long run with the value for money you've received. So with your wallet back in the pocket, with these 2 boxes we've got 2 HQ choices to choose from, in the more melee friendly Overlord or the shooty Royal Warden. a couple of rank and file troop choices with 2 units of 10 warriors, 2 units of 3 Canoptek Scarabs taking up fast attack slots, and a unit of 3 Scorpec destroyers that take up an elite slot. These come along with a Canoptek Plasma Sight that only takes up a further elite choice if you're not tabling a destroyer cult unit, which the destroyers just so happen to be. On this day and at this time though, we're going to lean towards the Royal Warden as our HQ choice, gobbling up a lesser 4 of our available 25 power or 75 of our available 500 points. This fulfills the minimum 1 HQ required for a patrol detachment, and will by default also be our Warlord. As a side note at this point, picking your Warlord does have some faction specific restrictions, as there is a hierarchy based on unit keywords in Necron armies, but we'll cover this in more detail when we increase our army size in the next video. To complete our detachment requirements, we'll be taking not 1 but 2 warrior units as our troop choices. It makes the most sense to get as many models as possible to the table in a small size game, and so buying into those 2 starter sets allows us to do this. Warriors somewhat prefer shooting at mid-range, but with reanimation protocols making them a pig to completely destroy, they're not hopeless in combat either. Coming in at 6 power or 130 points per unit, we're well on our way at this point to filling out our army. Introducing some beef to proceedings is a unit of 3 Scorpec destroyers, an absolutely murderous unit of close combat specialists that, providing you're able to get them downfield without casualties, will go to work big time for you. However, they represent a good sized threat to your opponent, so they'll likely have a target on their back, and there's very little their sidekick that kinda could the Canoptek Plasma Sight can do about it. All he does is fill a very small hole in your list, and providing you avoid rolling a 1 gives your destroyer some extra attacks and a strength buff in combat. Taking up a fast attack slot are the Canoptek Scarab Swarms, the very definition of pests. 1 more unit that can sit on an objective and are equally adept at tying up opposing units with their 4 wounds apiece, meaning they'll require a relatively concerted effort to deal with them comparable to their cost. Speaking of which, at 2 power and 45 points for a unit of 3, these represent a highly mobile and useful unit to have at your disposal. So all this adds up to a total of 24 power or a nailed on 500 points. Don't worry too much about the 1 power left over, because if you're using this metric for a crusade force, it will give you more flexibility when you increase your supply limit to higher power levels. But if you absolutely positively have to min-max in this area, then swap out the Plasma Sight for another unit of Scarab Swarms. Our thematic build, on the other hand, where we try and cram in as many of the largely new Destroyer cult models and those they synergize with, give you a nudge nudge, wink wink to pick up the Recruit Starter Edition, leaving you to source the remaining 3 units separately. Do seriously consider buying the Elite Edition though, as it will definitely give you long-term return on investment, and also provides one of the units we're including here. In the HQ slot, we're retaining the Royal Warden, as he's cost effective and does a job, only bringing 1 unit of warriors. The main reason for this is to make room for 2 heavy support choices, a dynamic duo of 2 separate 1 model units of Locust Destroyers, our first destroyer cults on the team sheet. Mobile gun platforms that may as well be bought in the pack of 3. Each unit will set you back 3 power or 55 points in your list, and for the D3 damage you get in return, you'll be able to take some chunks out of any units with multiple wounds. This here path will ultimately give you a flavour of what each of the core battlefield roles bring to the table, because our final 2 units are a 3 model unit of Canoptek Scarab Swarms in the fast attack slot. We've already covered what they do, suffice to say they're adept at filling in small gaps in your list, and then the elite Scorpec Destroyers that we already incorporated into our other build. Another mob of destroyer cults that currently offer no real synergies, but we'll get to that in the next step up the ladder when we graduate to an incursion force. Sadly, there's no room for their buddy the Canoptic Plasma Sight if you're playing with points, as this brings the force from 495 points over the top to 510. But it's perfect for your starting Crusade force, as that brings you up to an even 25 power. Here at the end of the road, as we complete our starter for 10, this all adds up to a traditional list that will cost you about the same as the thematic build, but it gives you better value for money in the long run because you've got 2 units sitting waiting in the wings to be used when you further expand your forces. Unlike the latter, where unless you picked up that Elite Edition, everything you own is on the table, and you'll have to dip more into your pockets the bigger your army gets. That's it for the first part of this series, however. I hope this gave you the information you need to get started with your new Necron army. Stay tuned for the next parts that will see us planning and building incursion, strike force and ultimately onslaught sized forces. However, that's it from me. I'll see you next time.